In this video, I'm going to talk about some of the top ways we can use graph network analysis to gain customer insight. Now, if you haven't seen my previous video on graph networks, please check that out as it provides a nice intro into graph networks, what they are, what they're not, some of the common use cases, as well as some of the key technologies that you can use to get into them. Now, when talking about customer insights, one of the first use cases we want to take a look at is recommendations. Recommendations are actually the top use case for graphs. And one of the reasons for that is basically because graph functions are just so efficient for implementing recommendation engines. Now, some of the big players in the e-commerce space, such as Amazon and Netflix, their business heavily relies on recommendation. I've heard that something like 75 to 80% of the content delivered by Netflix is actually driven by recommendations. You can see in Netflix's case just how important that is for driving user engagement and the ability to effectively upsell their users on content that they otherwise might not have considered. Now, what are some of the key ways that recommendation engines are actually implemented? Well, there's a couple of key ways. The first method is a method called content-based filtering. And basically what this means is, if you go off and watch a movie, there's a good chance that you will be interested in other similar movies. The question is, how do you tell what is actually similar? Well, you're going to go off and you're going to look at a bunch of different attributes of that movie and find other movies with as many matching attributes as possible. You want to do a count on the different relationships between these different movies, how they're related by genre, directors, actors, and perhaps you might have some weighting on each of these relationships as well to eventually give you some sort of similarity score that you can use to recommend other similar movies. The next way that a recommendation engine can work is using a method called collaborative filtering. And basically the way that this works is, if two users have a similar interest in movies, recommend the movies that one of the users hasn't already watched. One of the key benefits of graphs here is just the fact that we have here this many-to-many relationship where a user can rate many movies and a movie can be rated by many people. If you try to map this out in a relational database, you could end up with a very, very big query. The next use case we want to look at is customer journeys. So when we talk about customer journeys, what are we talking about exactly? So what we're looking at here is all of the touch points that your customer has with your business. So maybe the first introduction of your business is something like a Facebook ad, which then drives a user to your sales page. After that, they might decide to visit some physical store, which has some different systems to your online systems. They might put it in through an online order, deal with your customer support, which has a ticket raised in a different system, and then leave a review in the review system. So there's a couple of key challenges that we have here when trying to analyze the customer journey. First of all, we have data stored on lots of different systems in lots of different places. So this is not just an issue for customer journeys, it's actually an issue for a lot of things. Now, it used to be that we would have to try and get all of our data into something like a data warehouse. But that's really difficult because when you're dealing with lots of different data sources, you then need to standardize and structure your data so that you can jam it into the data warehouse in a structured manner. And a lot of that takes a lot of time and is very expensive to implement. These days, we also have things like data lakes, which partially solves that issue because it allows us to take all this data from different data sources and dump it into a big bucket without having to predefine schemas as you do in a data warehouse. The problem is that even though that there are a lot of great tools now for working with data lakes, it's still difficult to work with just this big blob of data. To structure it better, we still need to have some sort of data model. But to build a data model using a data warehouse methodology, we end up back at square one. The solution? We model the relationships using a graph network instead. Graph networks allow us to effectively leave the data in place as is without having to transform it and start to explore and model the relationships between all of those different data points. The second challenge that we have when exploring the customer journey is that what we have here is really just one customer journey. And there could literally be an infinite number of different customer journeys that a customer could take. For instance, instead of entering this process via a Facebook ad, it could be something like through a referral or through perhaps some flyers that you hand out on the street. To capture all of these different journeys can be quite difficult when you're dealing with a sort of relational database model. And the reason for that is that in order to connect lots of different data sources with a relational database, you first of all need to know all of your tables and the relationship between those tables in order to build your queries. This is where graph networks are quite different, because graph networks are able to automatically traverse the relationships in a network. You don't need to know all of the data points and all of the relationships ahead of time. You can basically start with some sort of starting node and potentially specify some ending node or not, and automatically traverse the network to automatically find those relationships and other data points that that are actually connected to each other. And so this can be a useful way of actually discovering what customer journeys that the users are actually taking, as opposed to counting how many predefined customer journeys are taking place. The next use case I want to talk about is viral marketing. So in traditional marketing, you might do some advertising to generate some leads, which drives some business. Then you basically go off every month and spend additional money on marketing to bring in customers effectively one at a time. Now, the whole concept of viral marketing is that what if when you generate a lead or a customer, that customer then goes off and helps to generate additional leads and customers. This is actually the business model which is being used by companies such as Dropbox and Uber. So, for example, in the case of Uber, you refer a friend and they get a $10 credit towards using the service, and you get a $10 credit towards using the service, and you end up with this win-win situation. So there are some additional benefits of using this kind of marketing strategy. So first of all, if each person in your network on average refers more than one friend, you end up with a viral coefficient greater than 1. And basically what that means is you end up with this nice exponential growth. So instead of just having your initial marketing campaign, your leads continue to grow even when you stop doing anything. The other benefit of a viral marketing campaign is that when somebody else shares your message for you, it's no longer a message coming from the company's voice, but a message that's coming from a referral's voice or a friend's voice, somebody that you trust. And because of that, that message is much, much more powerful. Now, to take this one step further, what we might want to take a look at is who are the influencers within a network. So we could be looking for things for social influencers. This could be in a social network, or this could be from your existing customer base. Now, in the most basic level, you could say, well, who has social influence? Perhaps somebody who just has a lot of followers. But actually, the most powerful social influencers are people which create messages that other people want to then share. So when a social influencer sends out a message, it's not just their immediate followers who get it, but it's those followers who then think, wow, this is such a great message that I want to share this with my friends, and they want to share it with their friends, and then the network effectively becomes self-propagating. So again, this is where graph networks come in incredibly effective. When dealing with a relational databases are basically good for dealing with queries which are one layer deep, one relationship deep. If you didn't know how many layers you wanted to go out, you'd have to do some sort of recursion, a very, very expensive operation. But with graph networks, this is a very natural query and performed very effectively. If you found this video helpful, please do give a thumbs up and leave any comments below on other things that you'd like to learn. If you would like more tips, tricks, and strategies for working with data, please hit the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel. I have a new video coming out every Monday, so please do stay tuned in, and I will see you next time.